My grandfather asked for one thing before he died, and it was not a doctor. He asked to see the changing of the guard at dawn, the way he had seen it 60 years before, when he himself had stood in the line and worn the tall black bearskin and felt the weight of the rifle across his arm. I was the one who heard the wish. I was the one who promised. And I am the one who has to tell you what happened on the cold stone of the forecourt that morning, because if I do not tell it, no one will believe that men like that still exist, that honor like that still draws breath. I saw it, I was close enough to touch it, and I will carry it until I am as old as he was. His name was Edmund. To me he was only ever grandfather, a big quiet man who smelled of pipe smoke and bootblack, whose hands shook now but had once been steady enough to hold a salute through a 4-hour vigil without a tremor. He was 81 when the doctors stopped pretending. They used the soft words people use. They said comfort. They said weeks, then they said days. He listened to all of it with the same expression he wore for bad weather, and when the last of them had gone, he turned his head on the pillow and looked at me and said, "Mara, there is something I would like to ask of you, and you are free to say no." I told him I would never say no to him. I had never managed it in my life. "I would like to stand in the forecourt one more time," he said. "At dawn, I want to watch the guard change. I want to see the old ceremony done right by men who still mean it." He stopped to gather his breath, which came harder every day. "I know I cannot stand. I know I will be a nuisance in a chair, an old man in the cold, but I would like to be there when the light comes up over the gates, just once more. That is all I want." So I made it happen. You do not argue with a man who has decided how he wants to spend the little he has left. It was harder than it sounds. He could not sit up for long. The cold could finish what the illness had started. The nurse warned me, and she was not being unkind, only honest. I bundled him in 3 blankets and his old regimental coat, the dark one with the worn collar that he had kept pressed in tissue for 40 years, and I borrowed a chair with good wheels and a high back that would not let his head fall. My brother carried the oxygen. We left the house in the black before morning, the streets empty, the world holding its breath, and we drove to the great square before the palace gates while the sky was still the color of cold iron. I had not expected it to be so quiet. In the daytime, the forecourt is a river of people, tourists and phones and noise, but at that hour there was no one. Only the gilded railings catching what little light there was, the long pale stones of the forecourt stretching away to the gatehouse, and the lamps still burning their tired gold along the wall. Our footsteps and the soft hiss of the wheels were the loudest things in the world. "Closer," grandfather whispered. "I want to see their boots come down." We brought him as close to the rope barrier as we were allowed, near the corner where the guard would march, and we waited. The cold got into everything. I tucked the blankets tighter and held his hand under them, and I felt how thin it had become, how the great square hand I remembered had worn down to bone and paper. He did not complain. He watched the gatehouse the way a man watches a door he knows someone he loves is about to come through. And then we heard it, far off beyond the inner wall, the first sound of boots. I felt his hand tighten in mine. It is a particular sound, the changing of the guard, and I had never really listened to it before that morning. It begins as a rumor, a faint regular knocking carried on the still air, and it grows until it is a single great heartbeat made of many men moving as one. The new guard came through the arch of the gatehouse in column, and even in the half-dark I could see the precision of them, the red of the tunics gone almost black in the gloom, the bearskins tall and motionless above each face, the white gloves flashing at every swing of the arm. They came on in perfect time, each boot striking the stone in the same instant, and the sound of it rolled across the empty forecourt and broke against the gates. Grandfather sat up. I do not know how. He had not sat up unaided in a week, and there he was, his back coming off the chair, his chin lifting, his whole ruined body straining toward that column of men. His lips moved. I leaned close to hear him. There he breathed, There it is, they still do it right. The column wheeled. The relief halted at the post by the gate with a single crash of heels that seemed to shake the cold air, and the old sentry stepped off, and the new one stepped on, and the whole exchange happened in a silence so complete that I could hear my grandfather's breath rattling in his chest, could hear the small wet click of tears starting in his eyes, though his face never changed. He was watching the sentry take his post. He was watching a young man no older than 25 settle into the same stillness grandfather himself had held 60 years before, the rifle just so, the eyes forward, the chin level, a living statue planted on the stone. "That was my post," grandfather said. "That very corner. I stood there the winter the river froze. I stood there the night the old king died." His voice cracked and he did not seem to notice. "I never moved. Not once. They could have set the world on fire in front of me and I would not have moved, because that was the whole of it, do you see? To stand, to hold, to be the still thing that everything else could trust to stay still." I told him I saw. I did not yet, I would. The new sentry stood at his post, 20 paces from us, utterly motionless, and the dawn began at last to come up gray and then faintly gold behind the gatehouse, and my grandfather looked at him with an expression I had never seen on his face in all my life, a kind of hunger and a kind of peace at once. He had come to say goodbye to the thing he had loved most in the world. He had come to look at his own youth standing there in the cold, unbroken, still being kept by other hands now that his had failed. And that, I thought, was the whole of it. We had come, he had seen, and soon I would take him home to die warm. It was enough. It was more than I had hoped to give him. I did not know that the morning had not even begun. For a while we simply watched. Grandfather settled back into the chair, spent from the effort of sitting up, but his eyes never left the sentry. The gold spread up the sky. A bird started somewhere along the wall and was the only voice in the whole vast square. I found that I had stopped feeling the cold. I was watching the young man at the post the way grandfather was watching him, and I began, slowly, to understand what my grandfather had spent his life inside. The sentry did not move, not the way the living move. His chest rose and fell so slightly you would not have caught it unless you were looking. The wind off the gates lifted the fur of his bearskin and let it fall, and he did not so much as blink. He was a young man, I could see that now in the growing light, with a clean, hard jaw and pale eyes fixed on the middle distance, and he had made himself into a thing of stone, and the stillness of him was not emptiness. That was what I had never grasped. The stillness was full. It cost him something to hold it, and you could feel the cost, like a held breath that goes on and on past the point where any ordinary man would have to gasp. To stand like that, I understood, was not nothing. It was the hardest kind of doing there is. "You see how he keeps his weight," grandfather murmured. He had found a little more breath. "Off the heels. A man who locks his knees faints inside the hour. They teach you to stand like a tree, not like a post. A tree gives a little, a post snaps." He almost smiled. That one was taught right. Look at him. He could stand there until the stone wore away. Then a strange thing happened, and I almost missed it. The sentry's eyes moved. It was the smallest thing in the world. His head did not turn, his face did not change. But for half a heartbeat his gaze slid from the middle distance and came to rest on my grandfather, on the wasted old man bundled in the regimental coat with the worn collar, and then it slid forward again and was fixed and far away as before. If I had not been watching his face with my whole attention, I would never have seen it. I am not sure my brother saw it. But I saw it, and something in my chest went very still. He had seen the coat. I was sure of it. I did not know yet what the coat meant to a man like that, what the worn collar and the particular dark cut of it said to eyes trained to read a uniform the way the rest of us read a face. But I saw him see it, and I saw the half heartbeat it cost him to look away again, and I understood that something had passed between the dying man in the chair and the young man at the post, something I was not part of, in a language I did not speak. "Grandfather," I whispered, "I think he noticed you." "No," he said, and there was a gentleness in it, the gentleness of a man correcting a child he loves. He noticed the coat. "There is a difference. He will not break for me, Mara, and he should not. That is the whole point of him. He stands for everyone or he stands for no one. If he nodded at every old soldier who came to watch, the standing would mean nothing." He drew a slow breath. "Do not wish for him to break. The not breaking is the gift. Just let me look at him." "That is plenty." But I had seen the young man's eyes move, and I could not stop thinking about it. I watched him now the way you watch a frozen pond when you have heard the ice creak. He was perfectly still again, perfectly correct, the rifle at his shoulder, the gloves bright, the bearskin tall. And yet I had the strangest sense that the stillness had changed in quality, that the young man was holding something now that he had not been holding before, and holding it harder. The light came up enough that I could see, across the forecourt by the gatehouse, a second figure. An older man in the dark uniform of an officer stood in the shadow of the arch with his hands clasped behind him, watching the post the way an officer watches his men, and watching us too, I thought. I did not know who he was. I would learn his name before the morning was out. For now he was only a still shape under the arch, and I assumed he was there to see that everything was done correctly, that no tourist climbed the railing, that the ceremony kept its dignity even at this empty hour. Grandfather's breathing was worse. The cold was reaching him through the blankets. The nurse's warning came back to me, and I leaned down and said, "We should think about home soon. You have seen it. You have seen them do it right." "A little longer," he said. His eyes were wet and he let them be. "I am saying goodbye, Mara. You do not rush a goodbye." His hand found mine again under the blankets. 60 years. I gave them the best of what I had, and I have never once been sorry. Not many men can say they spent their strength on something worth the spending. That boy there, his gaze went back to the sentry, he is spending his on it now. The same stone, the same cold, the same standing. It does not end when I end. That is the comfort. The post does not go to the grave with the man. There is always another to take it up. His voice dropped almost below hearing. I only wanted to look at it one more time, to know it goes on. I have thought 1,000 times since about what he said. The post does not go to the grave with the man. I think the young sentry, 20 paces off in statue, still, was thinking something very like it. Because of what he did next, I am sure of it. The sun cleared the gatehouse roof. The first real light of the day struck across the forecourt, and lit the red of the sentry's tunic to a deep, clean scarlet, lit the brass of his buttons, lit the white of his gloves so they seemed to glow. And lit, too, my grandfather's face, the gray skin and the bright wet eyes and the old coat with the worn collar, so that for one moment the dying soldier and the young one stood in the same gold light, one in a chair and one at his post, the end of a life and the middle of one, joined by a thread of cold air across 20 paces of stone. I saw the officer under the arch step forward out of the shadow. I saw the young sentry's jaw tighten. And I felt, the way you feel weather change, that something was about to happen that none of us had come for, and that there would be no taking it back. The officer crossed the forecourt toward us. He walked the way men in that uniform walk, unhurried, each step measured, his polished shoes clicking on the stone, and I had the sudden cold fear that we had done something wrong, that an old man in a chair was a breach of some rule, that we would be asked to leave before grandfather had finished his goodbye. I felt my brother stiffen beside me. I gripped the handles of the chair. The officer stopped a respectful distance from us and looked down at my grandfather, and his face, which had been stern under the arch, was not stern at all up close. He was perhaps 60, with iron-gray hair clipped short and lines around his eyes that came from squinting at parade grounds in hard light for 40 years, and he looked at the regimental coat with the worn collar the way a man looks at a face he has not seen since he was young. "Forgive me," he said quietly. "I do not wish to intrude on you, but I have to ask, that coat, where did you come by it?" Grandfather's eyes came up slowly. It took him effort now to focus, but he focused on the officer, and for a long moment the two of them simply looked at each other, the standing man and the failing one, and I watched something pass between them too, some recognition that had nothing to do with names. I earned it, grandfather said, 60 years ago. At that post, he could not lift his arm, so he moved his eyes toward the corner of the gate where the young sentry stood. I wore it on the ground you are standing on. The officer was very still. What was your regiment? Grandfather told him. He gave the old name, the proper name, the one I had heard him say perhaps twice in my whole life. On the 2 days a year he allowed himself to remember out loud. And he gave the dates, the years he had served, in the flat exact way of a man who had said them to a superior 1,000 times. And as he spoke I saw the officer's face change. I saw it go from polite inquiry to something I can only call reverence. He came to a kind of attention without seeming to move at all, the way these men can, his shoulders settling, his chin coming level. Sir, the officer said. That single word. He said it the way you would say it to a general. He said it to a dying man in a wheelchair wrapped in 3 blankets, and he meant every weight of it. I know your name, the officer went on, and his voice was not quite steady. Every man who has stood that post knows your name. It is on the wall of the guardroom. The vigil through the night the river froze. The 4 hours in the storm when they could not relieve you and you would not come off. We are taught it the first week. We are taught that what we are asked to do, a man once did better and that his name was yours. He stopped and swallowed, and I understood that this stern gray officer was holding something back the way the young sentry held his stillness, at a cost. I never thought to meet you. I thought you were a story. Forgive me, sir. I thought you were already gone. Nearly, grandfather said, and there was the ghost of his old dry humor in it. Give it a day or 2. I had not known. That is the thing I have to make you understand. I had grown up with him, I had loved him my whole life, and I had not known that the big quiet man who smelled of pipe smoke was a name on a wall, a thing they taught young men so they would have something to stand up to. He had never told me. He had carried it the way he carried everything, folded away in tissue paper like the coat, taken out twice a year and looked at and put back. He had never once said, I am the standard. He had only ever said to stand, to hold, to be the still thing. Why have you come, sir? The officer asked gently. At this hour, in this cold, tell me what you came for and I will see it done if it is in my power. Grandfather looked past him at the young sentry burning red and gold in the new light. I came to watch the guard change one more time, he said. I came to see it done right by men who still mean it, and I have seen it. He is splendid, that one. He was taught right. His breath caught. That is all. I did not come to be a bother. I came to look and to say goodbye and to know it goes on without me. It does. I have seen that it does. You may take me home now, Mara, with my thanks to this officer for his kindness. But the officer did not move to let us go. He stood there in the gold light with his jaw working, and I could see him deciding something, see him weighing it the way these men weigh everything, against the rules they have sworn to keep. There are rules about the post. I would learn how many. The sentry does not speak. The sentry does not turn. The sentry does not acknowledge any person, however high or low, because the moment he chooses one face to acknowledge he has stopped standing for all the rest. Grandfather had told me as much an hour before. Do not wish for him to break. The not breaking is the gift. And yet, the officer turned and looked at the young sentry, and the young sentry, 20 paces off, looked back at him, not with his head. With his eyes only, that same half-heartbeat flick I had caught before, eyes meeting eyes across the cold stone. And I understood that they had been speaking, the two of them in the silent way of their kind, since the moment the column first wheeled into the forecourt and the young man's gaze had brushed the coat with the worn collar. They had recognized him. The whole guard had recognized him. The name on the wall of the guardroom had come to the forecourt in a wheelchair to die, and they had known him the instant the light touched his coat, and they had stood there holding their stillness around the knowledge like men holding a flame out of the wind. The officer made his decision. I saw the moment he made it. His shoulders came back another quarter-inch, and he turned to my grandfather and he said, "Sir, I would ask you to wait, just a little longer. There is something the guard would like to do if you will permit it." "I do not want a fuss," grandfather said. "I am not owed a fuss." "It is not a fuss, sir," the officer said. "An ode has nothing to do with it." He paused. "Some things a man does because they are right and the books be hanged. You taught us that too. It is on the wall under your name." He turned and walked back toward the gatehouse, and I held my grandfather's hand under the blankets and felt it trembling, and the sun climbed another finger's width up the morning sky. "What are they doing?" my brother whispered to me. He was 23, and he had never in his life been close to anything that asked him to be quiet inside himself, and I could see he did not know where to put his hands. "I don't know," I said. "Watch." Under the arch, the officer had stopped and was speaking to someone we could not see. A moment later, 3 men came out of the gatehouse in step. I do not know how to make you feel the way that looked. 3 guardsmen in full ceremonial dress, scarlet and black and brass and white, came out into the gold light of the forecourt in perfect time, the boots coming down as one, and they did not march toward the changing post where the duties of the morning lay. They marched toward us. I felt grandfather go rigid in the chair. "No," he said softly. "No, this is too much. Mara, tell them." I did not come for this. But there was no telling them anything. The 3 guardsmen came on across the stone, and the officer came at their head, and behind them I saw the young sentry had not moved from his post, but his eyes were no longer on the middle distance. His eyes were on my grandfather, openly now, and he had stopped pretending otherwise. The stillness he held was no longer the stillness of a statue ignoring the world. It was the stillness of a man at attention before something he honors. There is a difference, and I had learned it that morning, and I could see it plainly now. The 3 guardsmen halted a few paces from the chair. The boots came down together with a single crack that rang off the gates and rolled away across the empty square. And then they did a thing I will see behind my eyes for the rest of my life. They came to attention before my grandfather. Not the loose attention of men waiting for orders. The full thing, the parade thing, spines like rifle barrels, chins level, gloved hands flat against the seams of the trousers, eyes front and fixed on the dying man in the chair as though he were the king himself come down to inspect them. 3 young men in the prime of their strength, standing for an old one who could no longer stand, and the cold gold light pouring over all of it. The officer stepped to the side, the way an officer does when the moment belongs to the men and not to him. "Sir," he said, and his voice carried in the still air, "the guard would like to render you the honors of the post. With your permission." Grandfather could not speak. I watched him try. His mouth worked and nothing came out, and the tears that had stood in his eyes all morning finally spilled and ran down into the worn collar of the coat, and he gave one small nod because he could not do more, and because some part of him that had stood at that post 60 years ago knew that you do not refuse the honors of your own regiment. You do not insult the men by telling them you are not worthy. You take it. You let them give it. That is its own kind of standing. The officer turned to the 3 guardsmen and gave a command in a low voice, words I did not know, the old words of the drill, and the 3 of them moved. I have watched the changing of the guard 100 times on television since that morning, looking for it, looking for the thing they did, and I have never seen it done. I have asked, carefully, here and there, and the answers I get are careful too. It is not in the program. It is not a thing they perform for crowds. It is older than the program, one old soldier told me, and you will only ever see it if you are very lucky and very near to something that matters, and most men go their whole lives in the uniform and never see it once. It is the honor the guard renders to its own, to one of the line who is going where the line cannot follow. A salute for a man who held the post when holding it was everything, given as he leaves it for the last time. The 3 guardsmen brought their right hands up, not the quick flat salute of the street. A slow salute, the slowest I have ever seen, the white gloves rising by inches as though they were lifting a great weight, the elbows coming up level, the fingers settling against the brims of the bearskins with a precision that took my breath. And they held it. They held the salute the way grandfather had told me. He held his vigils, past the point where any ordinary man would have had to lower the arm, past the point of mere ceremony, into the place where the gesture stops being a gesture and becomes a thing said with the whole body. They held it for my grandfather, 3 young men with their arms up and their eyes fixed on his ruined face, and the sun climbed, and the cold air did not stir, and nobody in the whole vast forecourt made a sound. And then I heard it. Across the stone, 20 paces off, at the corner post by the gate, the young sentry had brought his own hand up. He was not supposed to. I understood that even then. He was the sentry on duty. His post was the gate. His eyes belonged to the middle distance. His stillness belonged to everyone and to no one. And of all the men in that forecourt, he was the one most strictly forbidden to acknowledge any single face. The officer had not commanded it. The 3 were the ones detailed to render the honors. The sentry's whole sworn duty was to stand and to hold and to do nothing else, to be the still thing that everything could trust to stay still, exactly as my grandfather had been the still thing 60 years before. And he broke it. For my grandfather he broke it. He brought his white glove up in the same slow salute, alone at his post, his rifle shifted to the crook of his arm, his young hard face turned full toward the dying old soldier in the chair, his eyes no longer hidden at all, shining in the morning light. He held the salute with the 3 others, 4 white gloves raised in the gold air, and he was the one who should not have. And he was the one whose salute meant the most, because his was the post my grandfather had held, his was the very corner, his was the stone where the name on the guardroom wall had once stood through a winter the river froze. I felt my grandfather's hand close on mine, with a strength I had not believed was left in him. "Mara," he whispered, "Mara, do you see what they are doing?" I could not answer. I was weeping, and so was my brother, and so, I saw, was the gray-haired officer standing to the side with his jaw clamped tight and the wet bright on his cheeks, an old hard man who had squinted at parade grounds for 40 years and was not ashamed to stand there and let it run. "I see," I managed. "I see, grandfather, I see all of it." How long they held it I cannot say. Time did not work the way it usually does. It might have been 10 seconds. It felt like the whole length of a man's life. 4 white gloves raised in the cold gold air of the forecourt. 4 young men giving the slow salute to an old one who had given 60 years to the same patch of stone. And the dawn full up now over the gatehouse. And not one sound anywhere except my grandfather's broken breathing, and the small wet noise of all of us trying not to weep aloud and failing. Then the officer spoke the command to lower, and 4 arms came down together, slow as they had risen, and the white gloves settled back to the seams, and it was over. The 3 guardsmen who had marched to us came smartly back to attention. The young sentry at the corner returned his eyes to the middle distance and his hand to his rifle and became, once more, the still thing he was sworn to be. If you had walked into the forecourt 1 minute later, you would have seen nothing at all. Only the ordinary morning guard, immaculate and motionless. You would never have known. But I knew, and my grandfather knew, and he was at peace in a way I had not seen in all the long months of his dying. The officer came back to the chair and crouched down so that his face was level with my grandfather's, which is a thing men in that uniform do not do, kneel in their dress before a wheelchair on the public stone, and he did it without a flicker of thought. He took my grandfather's thin hand in both of his. "Thank you, sir," the officer said, "for all of it, for the post you held and for the standard you set and for coming back to let us give you what we owed. We will not forget that you came. The men who saluted you this morning will tell it to the men who come after them, and they to the ones after that, and your name will be on that wall long after all of us are gone from it." He pressed the thin hand once. "You stood for us when we were not yet born. It was the smallest thing in the world to stand for you this morning." "It was not small," my grandfather said. His voice was almost gone now, but the words were clear. "Nothing about it was small. You broke your own rule for me. That boy at the post broke his. You should not have, and I am glad past all saying that you did." He drew a breath that rattled. "I came to make sure it goes on. I have seen better than that. I have seen that it goes on, and that the men who keep it now keep it with their hearts and not only their boots. That is more than I had any right to ask. I can go home now." We took him home. The officer walked beside the chair all the way to the edge of the forecourt where the car waited, and he came to attention one last time as we lifted my grandfather in, and he stood at attention, alone, until the car had pulled away, and the great pale square, and the gilded gates, and the immaculate young sentry at the corner post had all slid out of sight behind us. My grandfather lived 9 more days. They were good days, as those days go. He was tired and he was failing, and the breath came harder each morning, but the grayness that had been in his face for months had lifted, and he talked more than he had in a long time. He told me things he had never told me. He told me about the winter the river froze, and the 4 hours in the storm, and the men he had stood beside who were all gone now. He told me about the first morning he ever took the post as a frightened boy of 19, and how his sergeant had said the same thing to him, that, 60 years on, he had watched a young sentry live out on the same corner of stone. To stand, to hold, to be the still thing that everything else can trust to stay still. He said his life had been a small one and an unfamous one, and he would not have traded it for any other, because he had spent it on something worth the spending, and because at the very end of it 4 young men in scarlet had raised their gloves to him in the cold and made him understand that the spending had counted. On the 9th day he did not wake, and his hand was in mine, and his face was easy. The regimental coat with the worn collar hung on the back of the door where I had pressed it again in tissue paper, exactly as he had kept it for 40 years. I went back to the forecourt once more, alone, on a gray, ordinary afternoon a month after the funeral, when the square was a river of tourists and phones, and noise the way it always is by daylight. I stood at the rope barrier near the corner post, and I watched the sentry there, a different young man, motionless and immaculate, his eyes on the middle distance, the bearskin tall above his clean, hard face. The crowd flowed past him and around him, and most of them barely looked, and the ones who looked saw only a soldier standing still, a thing for a photograph, a man who was not allowed to move. I knew better now. I knew what the stillness cost and what it was full of. I knew that the standing was not nothing but the hardest kind of doing there is, and that behind that unmoving face was a whole man holding a whole life out of the wind like a flame, exactly as my grandfather had held his. I did not need anything from that young sentry. I did not wish for him to break. I understood, at last, the thing my grandfather had tried to tell me at the very start of that cold morning, that the not breaking is the gift, that the post does not go to the grave with the man, that there is always another to take it up. I stood at the barrier a long while, and I let the crowd flow past, and somewhere behind me the boots of the relief began their far-off knocking on the stone, growing into that single great heartbeat made of many men, and I closed my eyes and listened to it roll across the forecourt and break against the gates, the same sound my grandfather had heard 60 years before, the same sound he had asked to hear one final time, and I thought, it goes on. He was right. It goes on. They broke their own rule for an old soldier at dawn, and it cost them nothing they were not glad to pay, and it gave a dying man the only thing he had asked the world for at the end. I have told the story to anyone who will sit still long enough to hear it, and I will go on telling it, because men forget, and because the young ones standing in the cold deserve to be remembered for what the stillness costs them, and because somewhere on a wall in a guardroom there is a name, and under the name there are words about a man who held the post when holding it was everything, and I am the only one left who can tell you that the name was real, that the man was real, that he was my grandfather, and that on the last clear morning of his life, 4 white gloves rose in the gold air to tell him so. He never moved at his post in 60 winters, not once, and at the end of everything the post moved for him.